If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. It's Halloween in 56 days, in the spirit of Spooktember. People, tell me your creepiest true paranormal stories. About 15 years ago, my mom and cousin were coming home from visiting my aunt, who lived 2 hours away. The drive takes you through the desert and up some mountains, but there is a shortcut you can take to avoid the mountains and shave about 10 minutes off your drive time. The only problem is that the shortcut takes you literally through the middle of nowhere. It's a 2-lane road with nothing for 30 miles, no houses, no shops, no lights, not even those roadside emergency phone booths. They're driving along through the shortcut at about 11 p.m. when they spot something on the road. At first, my cousin thinks it's a rock, so she slows down to go around it. When she gets closer, she realizes it's a lady with long black hair and what looks like a burlap shawl wrapped around her. She's crouched down, facing away from my cousin. My mom says that she thought the lady might have been in trouble, so they pulled up next to her and asked if she was okay and if she needed help. My cousin says the lady stood up, looked at them, and let out a shriek like a goddamn banshee. She insists that her eyes were pitch black, her skin was as white as a sheet, and she was really skinny, like almost anorexic skinny. I debated this because it was dark out and her mind might have been playing tricks on her, but nonetheless, it was enough to spook the hell out of her and make her punch the accelerator and get out of there. The lady briefly ran after them, but they lost sight of her after a short while. They didn't stop for anything, even running a stop sign, until they got to the next town, where they stopped at a gas station to get something to drink and to collect their thoughts. A few weeks later, my cousin was telling her coworker what happened, and she said it might have been a skinwalker that she saw and that she's lucky she got away. That spooked her even worse, so now she won't go through the shortcut, even when someone else is driving. She insists on taking the main highway. My mom maintains that it was probably some crazy lady on drugs. I was on the phone talking to my girlfriend, probably 14 at the time, and she was playing with a Ouija board. She was telling me she was communicating with this guy's spirit, who had died in a car crash. Yay, I said. So I hear this swirring sound over the phone. I inquire, and she replies, the pointer is going around and around really fast. It usually means the spirit is angry. She asks the spirit why he is mad, and he spells boyfriend. She denies being my boyfriend. Apparently this spirit has a crush on her, which she discovered during her little talk with him. So I'm here, sitting on my couch randomly flipping through channels, and I tell her I don't see why she plays with dumb stuff like that. I hear the swirring again. She asks again why the spirit is mad, and she gets the same response, boyfriend. She tells the spirit again that she's single, which is followed by the spelling lie. She asks, how do you know? So she starts reading the letters from the board, G, L, O, S, C, O, W. Babe, what does Glasgow mean? I don't know, I reply. I'm sitting here listening over the phone to this. I've happened to stop the channel on Wheel of Fortune. It's the bonus round, and the guy is just starting to reveal the answer, Glasgow. I think I sat there, staring blankly at the screen, wondering if they were watching TV at the same time, to try and explain how she came up with this word. My girlfriend lived out of the city at the time, and her family didn't have cable TV. That night, as I slept in bed, I rolled over and turned, looking at my closet. I started to see this bright yellow flashing light turning on and off. Mind you, my friends and I used to steal these yellow flashing lights from the construction zones near our house, and the only way to turn the lights off was to physically remove the lid from the battery enclosure. I had this thing completely disconnected sitting on my shelf, and it started flashing in the dead of the night. I ended up just putting the covers over my head and falling asleep. The craziest thing to ever happen to me. When I was 4, we moved into a large old townhouse. Every summer we would go on holiday, and one of my many cousins would look after the house. Go in on an afternoon, turn on the lights, close the curtains, etc. Sometimes, when they would go out partying, they would stay at ours because it was walking distance from town. First cousin said never again. They said someone was watching them when they woke up during the night and left. Then the second cousin said something similar, and then the third said they saw someone fall from the ceiling and land on top of them. Slowly, each family member refused to stay over. We even had neighbors say they would see someone walking around our house and were wondering why we would not answer. I never saw anyone, but I swear I used to always hear someone in the loft coming down the creaky old ladders or someone coming upstairs. We eventually moved when I was 17. My parents finally said, yeah, we used to see and hear things all of the time. A lot of stuff that people experience, including myself, can be easily debunked by science and physics, Low-frequency standing air waves or high levels of EM radiation affecting brain function, pareidolia, mass hysteria, hypnagogic hallucinations due to sleep paralysis or sleep deprivation, etc. But one experience. My sister and I were exploring this abandoned mansion in Fair Oaks, California. Not ghost hunting or anything, just experiencing a house that has been frozen in time for over 100 years. It was the middle of the afternoon, and both of us were wide awake. As we made our way to the third floor, we would both hear random bumps and odd noises behind us, but we wrote them off as just the effects of two people walking through a wooden structure with unstable foundations. We got to the attic door, and it wasn't locked but still warped in the frame and jammed shut. We were discussing whether or not to force it open when, from less than 3 feet behind us. Please don't. Clear as day, as if a young woman was standing right behind us. We got the duck out of there quickly. Bachelor's Grove, Chicago suburbs. Went for a walk with a few friends and was taking pictures. I had heard it was a haunted place, but I didn't believe in ghosts. As I was snapping a picture of a few old headstones, I felt a whisper in my ear, "Don't." I thought it was just my mind playing tricks. So I went to take another picture, and I heard "Don't" shouted into my ear like a screaming maniac. I ran so fast back to the car. Only time anything like that happened. Nope, never again. You go into Bachelor's Grove, and you're asking for it. I am an amateur ghost hunter, so I have a handful. One that I find particularly spooky occurred at a cemetery with my boyfriend and a friend. The boyfriend doesn't believe in ghosts, the other friend believes almost too much. I have a spirit box that scans through radio frequencies at a set rate. The theory is that spirits can communicate via radio, which ties into electromagnetism, another key principle in ghost hunting. I can always get into depth explaining how things work if anyone has questions. My friend knew of a cemetery near her house, so we decided to go check it out. I brought the spirit box and an EMF meter, which measures changes in the surrounding electromagnetic field, as well as a camera, flashlights, and walkie-talkies. We arrived at the cemetery, and I noticed that the EMF meter was starting to pick up changes in the magnetic surroundings. This isn't out of the ordinary. The earth and nearby street lights have magnetic fields that would affect the readings. We turned on the spirit box. I pointed a flashlight to a grave and asked, "Who is buried here?" A voice came through the spirit box, giving the full name on the headstone. We repeated this 11 more times. 12 names were given, each in a different voice. The EMF meter started having bigger spikes than I'd ever seen. I think it maxed at 15.0, I forget what unit of measure, but this was a big deal as it indicated high energy spirit activity. Granted, it was a cemetery. My skeptical boyfriend was terrified, and my other friend was ecstatic. I was without reaction. I'm desensitized to events like this. We live next to the most haunted forest in the United States. My mom used to tell me about pukwudgies and wendigos. I guess if you see a big black bird and hear or see a black helicopter, you need to duck and run. I don't know why. But we went into the forest as kids, my childhood friend, her sister, and I, thinking it was fake. We heard and saw the helicopter and the black bird, and as soon as we ran out of the forest, my friend's sister had a seizure. I warn people about things in my hometown, but they think I'm crazy. Me and my friend were out walking back roads in Georgia, still near my house. I don't know why we were out at like 1 a.m., but it was Georgia, and the internet wasn't common yet. So we're just walking around, and you know the feeling you get when someone is just about to touch you and you can sense it? It was just like this, behind me, but 1000x worse. It felt like my hair stood on end so fast that the momentum of these tiny ass hairs extending lifted my ass off the ground. I've been skydiving and mountain climbing, and I've almost died plenty of times. The adrenaline rushes from that compare nothing to this ducking fear I was stricken with. What made it worse was that I paused for a fraction of a second, where time just stopped, and immediately noticed my friend did too, without even looking at him. In the other fraction of that same second, we were sprinting down this dirt road, and I honestly don't even ducking know why, and he was too. It's like my body went to full speed and I wasn't driving. I never looked back, and when we stopped right outside of my driveway, I remember looking at him and both of us just going, "WTF did we do that for?" I didn't have an explanation, but we both were persistent enough to not turn around even after running almost a mile. My friend Sam from middle school lives in an old funeral home. She used to tell me about how she swore her house was haunted. To be fair, it was super creepy, but I wasn't convinced. One day, in 6th grade, I slept over with another friend of mine, Annie. Sam told us about how there's a ghost in her room that she talks to. He stands at the end of her bed when she sleeps. He appears like a shadow, entirely black, with no discernible face or features. She said sometimes she could feel him in the room, including in that moment. She said sometimes she played games with him. We wanted proof, though we were scared shitless, so we told her to make him do something. She asked him to unzip Annie's bag. We all watched the bag, and he ducked and unzipped it. I never slept over again, to say the least. I had many paranormal experiences in the house I grew up in, but the creepiest one still freaks me out to this day. I was around 11 or 12 at the time and was in my bedroom with the door closed, playing my piano with my back to the door. I thought I saw, out of the corner of my eye, the door open slightly and thought it was my mother being nosy. I turned my head slightly to tell her to go away, being an angsty preteen and all that, but I saw a tall, dark shadow, like a figure wearing a long cloak. I turned back to my piano, scared shitless and frozen in fear. And I could sense this shadow moving across the room to where I was sitting. And when it eventually reached my vicinity, I felt the coldest blast of air I have ever felt, gooseflesh, shivering, and the shadow then disappeared through the wall. I saw the shadow again many times after, especially sitting on the end of my bed in the night. We also had a lot of poltergeist activity, with things being thrown at me and whispering in my ear. But that one day stands out as the most freaked out I have ever been. A few years later, they started digging up the ground just at the back of our house to build a new road. They found masses of skeletons, which they found out after archaeological testing, were dumped in a plague pit, or mass grave, which was used to bury the dead during the Black Death. A little background: my grandparents have a house on a lake in northern Louisiana. They have 2 graves in their backyard. These graves are very old, so old that we can't read the names, and the headstones are cracked and falling apart. We know that they're from the 1800s, though. When I stay with my grandparents, I share one of the bedrooms with my sister. It's towards the back of the house and has a large window with no curtains or blinds, so we can always see outside. It was a dark, stormy night, and I couldn't sleep. I looked up to see this man looking at us through the window. He was a tall black man who was bald. I was very confused because there's no way someone can get that close to the house. The lot is surrounded by a tall fence and a gate. There are 4 dogs who bark at the smallest of noises, so if they hear anything, they'll wake you up. There was no way this guy could get in the lot, and yet there he was. He disappeared with the next flash of lightning. Come to find out, that land was once part of a plantation. I really wonder if this guy may have been the ghost of a slave. Knowing that there are markers just down the hill from the house, it wouldn't surprise me. The scariest part is that I have seen this a couple times. He always comes on stormy nights and disappears quickly when I see him. This happened to my friend 3 or 4 summers ago. This is what he told me, including all the details. He was depressed about his ex and was moping around when he decided he wanted to go for a walk to get his mind off things. Around 1 a.m. he is about a block or 2 from his neighborhood when he decides to take a shortcut through this townhouse neighborhood to avoid going beside a busy road with lots of cars. He says no one was outside, and it was very quiet. As he cut in front of a house on the sidewalk, a figure started to come into sight in front of the house by the doorstep. He says it looked like a little girl playing on the ground. She was dressed in white and had very pale skin. He said what took him by surprise was how bright she looked in the dark, almost glowing but not quite. As he moved past her to continue the shortcut, she stood up, and he said she began to look like an old lady. Her face seemed to change age. She was looking at him as he was walking away from the house, and at this point he saw, and I quote, a black thing around her, like a ball or cloud. She was absolutely still and just looked at him as he was walking out of the neighborhood from a distance. He was extremely scared at this point but started to calm down when an ordinary man, or maybe it was just a random car? I don't remember, was passing by. As he was leaving, he saw something fly from the ground by his face and fly upwards. He wasn't sure what it was, so he just went on. He went home and immediately woke up his mom and brother and told them. I was not friends with him at this time, so he didn't bring up this story until I met him. Here's the crazy part. I decided to search ghost stories around the area where I live and came across someone who had an almost identical experience in the same area. Detail for detail, from the black object to the way the lady looked young and then old from different angles, the fact she was on the ground looking like she was playing before standing up, the color of her skin and clothing, and the object flying up from the ground. I believe the times of day were different, though. This is the story my friend told me after we finished up work at the club at about 5 a.m. and were just chilling. The subject is one of his mom's old friends. She was about 20 at the time and was on a camping trip through central and southern France in a car, staying in tents every night in woods or fields. There is the friend, her boyfriend at the time, and another couple, so 2 tents in all. One night they set their tents up on the edge of a wood facing towards the trees. Everyone is asleep, and it's silent as the countryside always is. She wakes up to a scratching sound outside the front of the tent, a little like digging or scraping. She's pretty creeped out because they are alone and the sound doesn't go away. She opens the zip in the front of the tent and sees this, a creature, about the size and shape of a man, crouched down like a dog on its haunches in between two trees, scratching the ground and sniffing the sky. The creature is naked and pale white and has a long conical nose like a dog or rat. I just sit there and scratch in the dirt and sniff the air. She is so scared that she slowly wakes up her boyfriend so he can see it. He silently looks, then closes the tent, and they hug each other to sleep. She has only recited this story twice, once to my friend's mom and once to my friend himself. The old boyfriend won't talk about it to this day. When I was in high school, I and some friends would go explore this half-built house that was across a field from our buddy's place. The house had been there, abandoned, for years, so we felt pretty comfortable exploring it. My friend lived out in the country, so we never had to worry about anyone being in the house or catching us there. One night, my friends and I decided to go to this house for another innocent yet fun reason. There were no drugs or alcohol involved, we just wanted to go exploring. We loaded into an SUV, and as we drove across the field, we all got quiet. When we pulled up, we sat in the car in silence, looking at the side of the house. Nobody moved, nobody said anything. We all had this gut-wrenching feeling that something wasn't right. One person mentioned it, and we all agreed that this was weird. We had been there plenty of times at night and never had this feeling of something isn't right, we shouldn't be here until now. Being our genius selves, we get out of the car and walk in, with this feeling of fear getting stronger the closer we get. Inside the house, we were all overwhelmed with this desire to just get out. My fight or flight senses started kicking in. I was terrified, on edge, and dreading every other second I had to spend there. There was this hole in the ground where they had an opening to the basement. We all stared at this opening and all knew that there was something down there in the blackness. Nobody was going to check it out. After staring into the black pit of terror for a solid minute, we all decided to get as far from that house as we could. We went back the next day and checked it out in the light, and everything seemed fine. The basement was empty apart from a weirdly small cot, and overall, nothing was out of the ordinary. To this day, my friends talk about that night like it was a nightmare. We all agree there was something in the house. Whatever it was, it had to be some dark, demonic thing. Something was telling us it wasn't safe from the moment we arrived. I've never felt anything quite as strong or terrifying as what I felt in that house. Whatever was in that basement wasn't human and wasn't there for good reasons. In the mid-80s, I lived with my wife in a small village in France, my wife's nation of origin. We lived in a tiny room on a farm that dates back to the 1400s. We had no hot water, no indoor bathroom, and no television. This was around the time of Chernobyl. We spent much of our time walking through the woods, looking for chestnuts, berries, and edible mushrooms. There was a small meadow surrounded by pine woods just a short distance from the village where we would go to pick some mushrooms that my wife was fond of. That is what we were doing on this particular day. I was nosing around the edge of the woods while she was filling her basket. I saw a ruin a short way into the trees, a sort of tower. I went to check it out. At some point, I looked up to see some huge stone blocks above me that looked like they could come down at any moment. I would have been flattened. I quickly left that spot and went to rejoin my wife. By the time I reached her, I was growing very uneasy. My wife was feeling the same thing. It was quiet, calm, and peaceful. We saw nothing at all, nor did we hear anything out of the ordinary, but we both sensed this heavy presence in our midst. Something was not happy with the two of us being there. It was unmistakable, and we both sensed it at the same time before we were back together. My wife speculated that there might have been a sanglier, a wild boar, somewhere nearby. This is a fine and sensible conclusion. They are large and dangerous animals. I don't think this was an animal, though. I've always felt that I had gotten something's attention while investigating the ruin and that it followed me out of there. In any case, we left immediately. Once back on the path to the village, the feeling of that brooding presence left us. I don't know what it was. Speculation is pointless. But as I said, I don't think it was an animal. Whatever it was, I hope never to meet it again. I was out with some friends and my boyfriend at the time in one of our favorite spots around 2 p.m. or so. It's this gorge-type place where you can climb some rocks, and it leads to a huge tunnel. We went through the tunnel as per usual, and the other side is full of rocks, plants, and stuff. Up the hill, there's a house with a couple of dogs. While we were there, my boyfriend suddenly felt really off and told me something was coming. Shortly after he said that, this horrible screech or howl rang through the hills, and the two dogs flipped out hardcore. We're thinking maybe it's a coyote, but it didn't sound like any animal I've ever heard. My boyfriend got sick to his stomach, and I felt extremely heavy. We're both pretty sensitive to this stuff, so while our friends were playing with a rope, my boyfriend was sitting down to rest. He had no color in his face, and I was standing in front of him, chatting and trying to put him at ease. He held up his hand to shush me and said, "Whatever you hear or see, don't speak or do not run." I then heard this deep growl coming from behind the bush that's directly behind him. I could slightly see through the leaves, and there was something very large and completely black standing on all fours, staring at him. I just stood there frozen, and my boyfriend whispered, "Look at me, it's okay." I looked at him as the growling grew louder before it finally stopped. We heard nothing run away or walk up on us. I couldn't see the creature fully, but it was too large to be any kind of wild cat or dog, and the growling came in multiple tones at once. I asked him what that was, and he told me it lives there and we need to leave before it makes us. So we told everyone it was time to go because my boyfriend doesn't feel well, and we got the hell out of there. We never told our friends about whatever that thing was, and we never went back through the tunnel again. Sometime later, after finding brand new camping stuff shredded, multiple suitcases of clothing tossed throughout the gorge, and abandoned camping equipment, someone had spray painted a very large black demon dog on the entrance of the tunnel. We promptly noped out of there, forever. From a small town way upstate NY. Myths and legends basically create themselves. One night, friends and I decide that we're going to venture out to this abandoned farmstead where supposedly a triple murder occurred. Typical high school teens with nothing to do sort of SHT, so we load up an SUV and trek out. The place is wicked remote, there is nothing but the smell of cow shit and dirt, and definitely no cell service. So we get there, and the place is super eerie. It's about 1030 p.m., and car headlights are the only thing illuminating the house and barn area. It's set away back off the road, so there are no streetlights to be seen. The house itself was nothing special. In fact, it appeared that someone had been dumping their garbage inside for years, a classic scumbag move. The barn was a whole different story. Flashlights in hand, we entered the front door. The inside was filled with junk, but it was bizarrely organized as if corridors were established. We started to explore. Myself and a friend went up some stairs at the entrance to the hay loft. This is where things took a freaking weird turn. At the top of the stairs began row after row of corn husks sharpened into spears, like to a ridiculously fine point. The husks were everywhere, as far as we could see. We started to enter the maze, but then we heard a shriek from below. A female friend and her sister ventured farther into the barn. We went down and found them in a junk corridor surrounded by small handmade idols, hundreds of them. Each one with a twisted body and deformed face. In a panic, they told us they heard someone else in the barn. We told them to relax, we would have heard another vehicle pull up. But as we made for the front door of the barn, we heard a noise from the back half. In the light of our headlights, we could clearly see a man standing in the back of the barn. He didn't move or speak to us, he just stood watching. We bolted for our cars. If he had followed us, I wouldn't have known. There was no way in hell I was turning to find out. Never been back. So, there was this kid I knew back in, middle school. His name was Julio. Julio was this short, crazy Mexican kid, and you would never really know what was going on in his head. He was fun to be around, and eventually one day my friend started up this joke where you could summon Julio by saying his name 3 times. He summed him up, and he appeared right around the corner. We laughed it off, but every time you said that name 3 times, he would always either come up behind you or around the corner shortly after. Now my ass thought it'd be funny as a joke to summon him outside of school, right? The first time I summoned him, I legitimately woke up at 2 a.m. to rustling and noises in my closet. Could have been a burglar or serial killer, but I kid you not, I went "That's just Julio" and fell asleep. Another time was when I was out camping with a friend. We were at some ranch, so there were a few shacks somewhere nearby and also a horse stable. My friend knew about this joke, and I decided to summon Julio again. Later that night, we both woke up to some banging inside the shack. The third and final time I've summoned Julio, he was on vacation in Colorado for spring break. Now I don't remember why I summoned him, but I did, and I again woke up in the middle of the night to noises in the closet, but this time I actually saw a figure moving around. Being the dumbass I was, I proceeded to go "That's just Julio" and sleep again, but it was actually kind of terrifying. I don't think I was just summoning Julio anymore, I haven't summoned him since, and nothing else has happened. I'm not sure it was a ghost, but around 1995 I encountered what is commonly called a shadow person. At the time, I was living in a double-wide mobile home that my late wife and I had purchased new. The home had been set up on what had previously been farmland. The location has never been the site of any home of any kind and is at least 1,000 feet from where any house is or has, to the best of my knowledge, ever been. This encounter took place at night, after my wife and I had retired for the evening. Normally at night, my wife and I would leave a light on all night in the bathroom farthest from our bedroom because there were usually children in the house. That bathroom was just outside the children's bedrooms and would provide them with a nightlight. However, on that night, all the children were staying somewhere else, and there was no one in the house except my wife and me. As was usual, though, we had left the light in the bathroom on out of habit, and it cast a glow through our open bedroom door, weakly lighting the room. Some time had passed after we had laid down, and I was unable to sleep. I assumed, though, that my wife was asleep because her breathing had become regular and reached a point at which it sounded like she was asleep. While lying there, unable to sleep, I began to become aware of a presence that I could not explain other than to say I knew we were not alone. I was laying there trying to convince myself that it was only my imagination when suddenly and silently a figure moved in through our bedroom door and proceeded parallel to our bed in a smooth gliding motion. Then, rounding the corner of our bed, we took up a fixed position at the foot of our bed. Strangely, I seemed to be acutely aware that this entity was conscious of us and was intently watching us while I was laying there watching it. The entity can best be described as something that had the appearance of black smoke or a shadow. However, it was more material than either of these but less material than a real person. The strangest thing about this whole situation was my complete lack of fear. Although I was acutely aware that some being had entered our room and there was no doubt in my mind that it was absolutely not of this earth, at least not as we perceive it, it did not seem to arouse any fear response in me. I would say it aroused a feeling that would fit somewhere between creepiness and curiosity, especially considering the fact that I was sure it was as aware of me as I was of it. After some time, I had almost convinced myself that I was imagining it due to my drowsy condition and the dim light. Suddenly, I realized that my wife was no longer breathing like she was asleep, her breathing had become almost silent. Speaking in a calm voice, I said, "Honey, are you awake?" To which she answered yes. Then I added, "Do you see anything?" I was expecting her reply to be, "What do you mean?" But instead, much to my surprise, she said, "You mean that thing standing at the foot of the bed?" When she said this, I did finally become somewhat nervous, and we both then began to pray. We lay there for about 10 minutes, softly saying prayers, and then it was gone. But it didn't just disappear. Over a period of about 20 seconds, it became less solid, like smoke clearing, and our perception of its presence became weaker and weaker until it just wasn't there anymore. Then it was as if it had never been there. Nothing like this has ever happened since, and the only evidence that it ever did is my memory of it. This happened about 14 years ago. Back then, I was really into paranormal movies and shows. I would go to graveyards at night with a friend and take video, hoping to capture something. Nothing ever came of it other than being creeped out by the utter quiet and darkness that is a cemetery at night. One night I woke up in my bed from a dead sleep, paralyzed with cold, numbing fear. I couldn't move. I shouldn't move because something in the room was watching me. I could feel it at the foot of the bed, near the closet. The childish instinct to hide in the blankets was so strong, but I just knew I could not move. It's hard to describe the type of fear I had. It was a fear created by knowing something terrible and evil was in the room waiting for me. It was something foreign, dangerous, and unlike anything I'd ever known before. For an estimated 30 minutes, I lay there without moving. I didn't turn my head. I didn't look around. I breathed. I waited while telling myself that, rationally, there was nothing there. There were other people in the house. The tree outside my window was rustling from the breeze. I could hear the familiar creaks of the apartment settling. Everything around me was normal except for that direction by my closet at the foot of the bed. I bargained with myself and argued internally that there was nothing there. I reasoned that it would be okay to move. I made a plan. I would roll slowly to my side and out of bed into the computer chair. I would turn on the computer and immediately immerse myself in the familiar world of the internet. I planned to visit my regular website haunts and open a chat with any available friend. It took another long 10 minutes of planning to pull myself into action. Everything went smoothly. I got up, climbed into my computer chair like it was a buoy at sea, and flipped the monitor on. I did not look at the closet. The screen drowned out the darkness of the room. I found a friend online and immediately messaged them about my plight. As we chatted, I began to feel my muscles relax. The overbearing evil thing started to fade as my attention was drawn to funny pictures and humor while my friend and I created jokes about the situation. An hour after I awoke from a dead sleep into a nightmare, I was brave enough to get a glass of water. I never looked at the closet until the dawn came in through the window to brighten the room. There was nothing there. To this day, I don't know what it was. Since that day, I have never gone to a graveyard seeking ghosts again, and I've never experienced anything else like it. I'll also never forget it, though, as it remains one of the most terrifying moments of my life. I was jogging around the woods close to where I live. There are gravel roads and light posts every few feet along the path. It's maybe 10 at night, winter time in Sweden, so it's pitch black and just quiet nature along the path. You can only see the gravel path and maybe some grass on the edges from the light posts and the stars. The rest is just dark woods. From the beginning of my jog, there was this eerie feeling in the air, just some weird energy or vibe that I could sense. So it started off with this weird vibe, which spiked anxiety for sure. As I was running, I kept low-key scanning my surroundings like there was something there. My thoughts went to thinking about ghosts and energies, different dimensions coexisting with us, as I kept running along the path. Maybe halfway into the jog, after 20 minutes of thinking about ghosts and energies, 20 minutes from any civilization, in the middle of the forest, I think to myself, alright, if there's anything out there, give me a sign, and as I barely got to finish the sentence, every single light post went out. I can't explain the chill that went through my body at that moment. I stopped completely. My heart is already beating from the jog, but now it's pounding. The chill goes through my spine out to every single nerve ending, and I'm just thinking what the duck. It's so dark that I can barely see my hand in front of me. I probably stood still for a few minutes just looking around, thinking, okay, what in the actual duck? And there was this feeling of just keep going, but I noped the duck out and turned back the same way I came because I sensed something was up ahead. I don't know what or why, but I just had this feeling. My phone didn't have a flashlight because it was years ago, so I had to use the lightning from my screen, inches from the ground, just to see where I was going. And the feeling of being followed before? Yeah, 100x that, half crawling back with my phone close to the ground. I get goosebumps just thinking about it right now. I could see maybe 5 to 6 light posts ahead and some in between the forest as the path wasn't a perfect circle, and all of them just click and go out. I kind of wish I kept going, though, but yeah, no, duck that shit. My family is all of Irish descent, and I'm fairly into all the associated lore that comes with it. Last November, I was driving across a moor in southwest Scotland at night. It was pitch black, and I know for a fact that nothing is up there. It was foggy, and accordingly, I slowed down to about 45 miles per hour. Now, I know that road like the back of my hand. It's not usually busy, and I hardly saw another car the whole journey. I became aware of a noise. I could hear it over the noise of the car and over the radio that I was listening to. I slowed down a bit more and turned the music off, but I could still hear it. I checked the mirrors and had a look around. I could see nothing. Getting curious, I put the windows down, which let me hear it clearer. The sound, which wasn't coming from any direction I could work out, was one of the most spine-chilling sounds I've ever heard. Imagine a sort of trumpet sound, but it's high-pitched and sounds organic. It's really hard to describe. It changed pitch but was loud. I covered 3 to 4 miles at about 30 to 35 miles per hour listening to this, and its volume or direction didn't change. It was like it was everywhere around me, an almost mournful keening wail. If someone told me that's what a banshee sounded like, I'd believe them. It was very disconcerting. I sped up as fast as I dared, put the windows up, and after a while, it just stopped. I've been up that road many times since, even stopping to look around, but there really isn't much up there. To this day, I have no idea what it was. My ex-girlfriend's dad didn't really like to talk about this story because he knew people wouldn't believe him and would judge him accordingly, but this is what he asserts happened. He is an avid hunter and likes to keep track of the local deer population. He was out spotting deer in his truck at night with his spotlight. He was alone and finishing up, sitting on the driver's side of his truck. In his rearview mirror, he saw a big, bipedal, hairy animal walking towards him. Scared, he stared as it walked up to his rolled-down window. The hairy, man-like creature spoke to him. "I am Cain, and I am made to walk the earth," it said to him before continuing its march down the canyon road. Panicked, he sped home. The next Sunday, he met with the bishop, despite never being a religious person, just to talk with him about what happened and help calm himself down. The bishop probably didn't help ease his fears, as many people in this particular religion believe that Sasquatch or Bigfoot is Cain, who was cursed to walk the earth for committing the first murder. As a skeptical, non-religious person myself, I find this story very difficult to believe, but the sincerity and reluctance with which he tells it really adds some depth. The bishop I spoke to about it also seemed to firmly believe him. I was at my grandparents' house one night, and my grandmother then came into my room at 3:30 in the morning and told me, "Your grandfather needs your help. Get up." This sort of startled me because she has never done anything like this. I go out to where my grandfather is right outside the door that goes into the garage, and he tells me, the garage door just went up and down 6 or 7 times, we need to check it out. I obviously said alright, and we went into the garage only to find that the pull string that prevents the door from opening, which can only be pulled from the inside, was pulled. He looks at me and says, we have to go outside to fix it so no one can get in. We then headed outside, and when we rounded the corner to look at the garage, the motion lights came on, and there seemed to be scratches on the door. He and I fixed the door and went back to bed. About 2 weeks after this, I was staying there again and woke up at around 2:30 in the morning to hear stomping in the kitchen, which is very close to my room. I get up and hear the stomps come closer to my door and stop. I figured that my grandfather was adjusting the thermostat. I opened my door to see what was going on, only to find that everyone in the house was asleep and all the lights were turned off. Needless to say, I didn't sleep well that night. A few weeks passed, and I went over there on a weekend because I had nothing better to do. Since it was a weekend, I stayed up rather late and fell asleep watching TV on my bed with my door opened. It was about 1:30 in the morning, and for whatever reason, I woke up without any reason. I look around and realize that I have fallen asleep with the TV on. I looked at my door, and at that instance, I saw a man-sized figure step out of my doorway and walk down the hall towards the kitchen. I slammed my door and stayed up all night. By this time, I was pretty convinced I had a demon, ghost, or something in my grandparents' house. I was just relieved that whatever was in their house wasn't following me. Maybe a month after the last incident happened, I was at my dad's house, and I was about to go to sleep. At my dad's, I am on the other side of the house from everyone. It was maybe 10:30 at night, and I was about to go to sleep. I had laid down, turned my TV off, and was drifting to sleep. Then, outside of my door, I heard a combination of stomping and a really low sound. This honestly scared the hell out of me. I, in all of my infinite wisdom, decided to see what it was. When I opened my door, I saw the same thing that I saw at my grandparents' house. I teared up from fear, left the light on, and fitfully tried to sleep. It didn't work well. Maybe a month and a half had passed since the last incident. I was at a friend's house, and he and I cleaned out his shed so we could just hang out in there and smoke his hookah. He usually has a lot of people over to his house, but this night it was just him and me. We were smoking hookah and were almost finished. We were just listening to some music, and I was just sitting there listening to the music when all of a sudden a black flash darted underneath my legs, but I didn't feel anything. I started to look around to see if one of his cats had come in with us. As I started to look around, I realized that there was no cat in the shed. I start to become afraid on the inside, but I try to keep myself outwardly calm. I look up at my friend, who has the look of being close to panic, and all he says to me is, "I think something just ran underneath your legs." At this point, I started freaking out because I didn't say anything about it. He told me that he saw it as well. We both ran out of the shed and went into his house, where we just watched TV until we calmed down and went to sleep. This was the last time anything like that happened. This was maybe 3 weeks ago. Back when I was a little kid, I used to hang around this tree all the time. One day, as I made my way to the house, my sister stopped me and asked why I was spending so much time playing alone in the tree. I told her I was playing with my friends. When she asked me to describe them, I told her they were little heads hanging off the tree like fruits. She was unsurprisingly shocked, but waved it off as another of my childhood imaginations. I had a reputation for being a ghost child. Years later, a family friend, who bragged he had a third eye, comes to visit, and he leaves the house with my cousins. The whole group is loud, and everyone is just having a good time, until they walk close to the same tree I played in. Suddenly, the new guy becomes dead silent, stares at the tree for some time, and then hushes my cousins. After they were a fair distance away from the tree, the new guy said to go home pronto, draw salt lines outside the door, and stay home for the rest of the night. He said it was because they angered the aswangs, the Philippine demon. Whatever happened to that tree? I heard the neighborhood rallied to cut it down after locals claimed it was causing all sorts of bad shit. I don't really remember much from the incident since I was around 4 when it happened. All I remember is that I used to do a contest with my cousins to see who could water the tree the longest. When I was younger, I used to live by the woods and could see a cemetery from my back porch. One Easter, I remember waking up and seeing the Easter bunny, in one of those terrifying costumes, and what really gets me is that I remember smelling the wet hay. When I woke up, I didn't tell anyone, but there was an extra Easter egg in my house that my parents didn't hide. Years later, when I was in high school, I asked my parents if they ever dressed up like the Easter bunny and came into our room. They said they would never go through so much trouble. Then my younger sister, who I shared a bunk bed with when this happened, said she remembers when the Easter Bunny came into our room and made a remark about the hay smell. I was terrified that we both remembered seeing a person dressed as a bunny in our room. To make it even stranger, I told the friends I sat with at lunch what happened. One of the girls was my neighbor across the street. She told me one Easter a long time ago that she looked out her window during the night and saw the Easter Bunny standing in her driveway. I had chills. To this day, I am terrified of people in rabbit costumes. A few weeks ago, I was walking my dog late at night, and I could see a woman a block or so away coming towards me on the same sidewalk. Nobody else was around, the street was deserted, just her and me. As she got a little closer, I could see that she was walking slowly, wearing shabby clothes, shuffling, and dragging a foot. Her head was low to her chest, and her hair was hanging, covering her face. When she was about 20 feet away, I started to get nervous. She definitely looked odd and was moving purposefully and quicker than I thought. I was frightened now, but I told myself I was being silly and overreacting. Stay calm, I thought. I tried to casually pull my dog to head off to the right, out of this woman's path, but no luck, my dog wasn't having it. When she was about a foot away, she lifted her head a little and croaked, "Hello, dear," and passed me on her way. She must have had some sort of disability or something, but I swear to God she looked just like a ducking zombie and scared the living shite out of me. My wife and I have our room in the upper half story of our house, and we fashioned a room on one end of the space for our then 2 to 3 year old daughter. Our room separated her space by a wall or door, and sort of between us was a crawl space for storage. Anyway, the first thing that happened we wrote off because it seemed so random. We're laying in bed one night and begin hearing this muffled, repeating sound. After the 4th or 5th time, I realized I was hearing, "The wonderful thing about tigers is that tigers are wonderful things. Bouncy, trouncy, etc." over and over again. I went into the crawl space and found, buried in a bin of toys, this spring-loaded Tigger doll that would hop up and down on the floor while singing his song. Cool toy, but that night was kind of freaky. I later learned that sometimes toys will go off if the battery is really old. Mystery solved. Within a week or two, our daughter was in her bed, and she never got out of bed once in. If she had to go to the bathroom or needed anything, she would just yell. That night, the wife and I were 2 floors down in our basement entertainment area, watching a movie. We had our baby monitor on. At one point, there was a little static or hissing. I know there are horror movies with this scene, and I heard a voice but could only make out that it was female. We lived next door to neighbors with cordless phones, and sometimes we would capture parts of their conversations on our baby monitor, so it was no big deal. Except that right after it happened, I could hear running footsteps upstairs. I ran up and saw my daughter at the other end of the floor in the bathroom. We kept the light on for her, standing in the corner of the bathroom wide-eyed, arms self-hugging, and cowering. That freaked us out. She couldn't even tell us that she was scared, let alone why. We started to conjure that there was a relationship to these events, which probably made us more sensitive to the next events. A few weeks or a month later, I'm laying in her little bed with her, reading a story. She asks me if she can read the book to her friend. I asked her who her friend was, and she smiled as she talked about Mr. Oxner. That's about as close as I could understand to the name she said. But she was sad because he was missing part of his leg from an accident. I'm freaking out big time at this point. She's only 2 or 3 effing years old. She thought the accident had something to do with a brick, or so he told her. I asked her where Mr. Oxner was. She said, "I shit you not. He's not from this world." Nope, but I couldn't get out of there. We told my sister-in-law about it casually one day. She's all weird and ghost hunter why, and she gave us this huge candle holder, about the size of a mango, made of amethyst and told us to put it near her bed. Now I have a doctorate degree, and I'm starting to buy into this shit, not the amethyst part, but the shit my daughter would have to have a wild imagination to tell me. Long story short, we put the amethyst by her bed and never had another issue. She never spoke of Mr. Oxner again. Happy Halloween. Shit. We have an Air Force base in our town. And my buddy and his friends were doing some wandering. When there's nothing to do in your town, you find SHT to do. So they find this abandoned old building about a mile from the Air Force base out in the middle of this wheat field. They decided it'd be fun to go look around. Windows were kicked out, and parts of the house were missing. They see a cellar and, like in a stereotypical horror movie, dare each other to go in first. My friend goes second in line, and they lift the door and tiptoe down the steps. They get about 3/4 down the stairs when they hear murmuring and shit. Scared the living duck out of everyone. The first person in front of the line to hear this lost his SHT and bolted back up the stairs. He rammed into my friend, who in turn rammed into everyone else, causing a loud-ass noise and sending them falling down the stairs. Absolute silence. Buddy looks up in a dimly lit room and sees hooded ducking people sitting down in a circle. Glaring at them, nope, they pretty much fought up the stairs. My buddy is pretty strong, and he's literally throwing these mother duckers up the stairs. They exit and just run. He says he saw a bunch of Air Force men in a car already parked outside the house. I saw them enter from the base. They start screaming, telling them, "What the duck are you doing here?" A friend tells them they were just exploring, and there are people down in the basement. The men round the people in the basement up and slowly walk back up. About a dozen robed, hooded Satan worshippers walk up first, followed by the soldiers. So, about a couple of months ago, 2 of my friends came to my place on a Friday evening after finishing their shift at work. They reached my place around 11:30 at night. We hung out for quite some time, and at about 01:45, they decided it was about time they went home. Both have to go together about half the way, and then they take separate roads to reach their places. They leave my place, and a kilometer or so away from my place is this lane, which they take as a shortcut to the main road. About halfway through, both feel a weight on their chests, and the hairs at the back of their necks stand on end. They get this dreadful feeling as they look at each other. They are riding their individual bikes, and usually at that time of the night they ride at about 80 kilometers per hour. They look around and notice that there isn't a single freaking dog on the entire road. There are always loads of stray dogs just lounging about, but this road is empty. No dogs, no wind, nothing. Absolute stillness around them. Both swear that they tried to speed up when they realized they were riding at 30 kilometers per hour, but no matter what, neither could do it. My friend was telling me later it was like sleep paralysis. No matter how hard my mind told my hands to accelerate, it was like the signals never reached my hands. The moment they reached the end of the road, they could feel the weight lifted off their chests, the air felt lighter, and they noped the duck out of there. To this day, neither of those 2 nor any of our friends take that route after about 9 p.m. despite our regular liquor store being at the end of that lane. I was a chaperone for a Girl Scout camping trip when I was 16, the kids were about 5 to 9 years old. I had a cabin with 6 kids that I was in charge of at night and helped out during the day. On night 1, one of my kids had a bit of a developmental issue. I wake up to her leaving the cabin. I chase after her, thinking she's going to the latrine, but she's sleepwalking. I'm out in the dark, barefoot, trying to coax this creepy kid back inside when I hear something big out in the woods. I grab the kid, and she starts screaming like an infant and goes stiff. I carry her back inside, everyone in my cabin is awake, and I don't sleep the rest of the night. Day 2, sleepwalker is moved to another cabin. That afternoon, when I'm walking the kids back from the latrine, a sleepwalker and another kid sneak away from the group. I realize they are gone, get help, and find the kids 15 minutes later. Back at camp, they start telling scary stories about their sneaking away, saying it was the kitty cow who lives in the woods. Night 2, I wake up, and it's gotten cold. Get up to close the windows and shutters and see a light in the woods, like someone has a lantern. It walks to a point in the woods, then stops. I stay still in the dark and watch it for a long while, about to shrug it off, when the light moves again, coming around and going down the side of the cabin, closer, but not close enough to see who is carrying it. I realize it's heading to the window by the kids' bunk beds, sneak over, and close the window and shutters. The light stays close to the other side of the shutters for a long time before moving on and disappearing. Day 3, tell adults about light. They dismiss it as probably being a ranger checking the campsite. By this time, kids are totally freaking each other out over kitty cow. I'm literally starting to be afraid to leave the craft area in broad daylight because kitty cow might be there. There are all sorts of weird kitty cow stories. That afternoon, we found out a bear broke into another camp and ate food, so in addition to a real threat, we think that may be the origin of kitty cow. Plus, it would make sense that there would be rangers out looking, as there's a bear on the loose. Night 3, I stay up listening to music to see if the lights will come back. About 1 a.m., I see it coming by again walking to a point in the woods and waiting. Around 1:30, it starts getting closer to the cabin. As it was walking around the side, I heard one of the other chaperones start to yell, "Hey, who is that? Who's out there?" The light cuts off. I yell back to the chaperone that I saw it too. What should we do? I'm terrified at this point. The chaperone tells me to bring my kids over to her, holding hands. We all cram into one cabin, and a bit later, a thunderstorm starts. Another night, I basically don't sleep. The next day, everyone sort of laughs it off again, sort of saying we weren't seeing anything. That maybe it was heat lightning or the kids were playing with flashlights and we saw them reflected. I'm so sleep deprived it hurts, and I'm hearing popping noises. I end up being paired with another chaperone, and we go for a hike with the kids. It's all foggy in the woods, and the kids are really strung out from the excitement the night before, which they blame on Kitty Cow. Out in the woods, the kids start claiming they are seeing Kitty Cow everywhere, sneaking up on us. I can't tell you now how weird and terrifying things were back then. You had this Silent Hill fog, all the girls were wearing matching ponchos, so the scene was surreal. The kids are freaking out over every tree, screaming that Kitty Cow is coming to get them, and I'm barely held together on no sleep, convinced myself that some weirdo has been creeping around our camp. Things literally devolve into mass hysteria. The kids are literally falling to the ground screaming and sobbing, and the other chaperone leaves. She just books it out of the forest back to camp while I'm coaxing, pulling, and carrying screaming children out of the mist. I got the kids almost back to camp when the other chaperones came rushing out. The chaperone who left claimed she saw a bear and ran for her life. I didn't leave any kids behind. I have never and will never experience anything as creepy and terrifying as that afternoon in the woods. While nothing happened, it has haunted my dreams since then.